Visions of Yzerman by Zachary Cullen. Chapter 5, LIDSTROM. Life in our small corner of Millwood slogged on as an arctic tranquility seized the woods behind the houses. February days blended together in a great white void. The Fords and Dodges of the neighborhood gasped and wheezed in metallic agony as their engines reluctantly turned in the glacial temperatures. Over the stove, Mom stewed up chili, clam chowder, broccoli cheddar soup, and anything else that might warm our little bones. Before dinner, we said grace at the dinner table. Patrick asked us to pray for the endangered whales in the ocean. I asked us to say a prayer for the Red Wings players before their impending game, which I had spent the majority of the school day fantasizing of, drawing Osgoods, Fedorovs, and logos in my notebook margins. As Patrick and I skeptically twiddled our forks through our green peas, Mom asked us about our day, while Dad told us to drink our chocolate milk. In the aftermath of supper, routine dictated the order of the house. Armed with yellow rubber gloves, Mom dutifully scrubbed our dinner plates in soapy water, while Dad sighed, plopped himself into his sunken spot in his brown recliner chair, and flipped through a never-ending pile of paperwork. Bills, receipts, taxes, all that other stuff that means nothing to a boy. Our two cats, Chester and Riley, named after Dad's boyhood baseball heroes, loitered about the house, staring idly out the sliding glass back door in the same way I looked out the classroom window to the playground during the school day, dreaming of warmer days frolicking in the backyard grass. The cats, too, tired of the Midwestern winter dragging its heavy boots. Game nights, about 15 minutes prior to puck drop, Dad again found his recliner, either in the basement or the living room. He had one in both, cracked that first beer of the evening, and turned on the Red Wings pregame show. "Ah, that's good stuff," he always exclaimed, emphatically, once he had that first sip of beer down. I sat in the distance for a while, watching from the kitchen or listening from the laundry room, until I had given him what I deemed an appropriate grace period of peace and quiet, which he reminded us frequently he had earned. Methodically, I moved into the living room and watched until he spoke or until the Wings scored. Eventually, Dad and I reached an agreement. If I did my homework and chores, I was allowed to watch Red Wings games with him until bedtime, at which point I had to resort to the radio broadcast on my bedside clock radio. During that 1995 winter, we fell into a routine of watching the Red Wings together, a ritual we kept for many years. And what a season it was for the Wings. Finishing the lockout-shortened month of January 5-1-0, the Red Wings set the pace in the NHL standings out of the gates and never looked back. By the end of February, they boasted a record of 12-4-1, and they were 22-7-2 by the end of March. During one streak, from February 15th through April 14th, Detroit went 22-3-1, while outscoring their opponents 103-56. They became a primary topic of discussion among the St. Michael's boys I considered my friends at lunchtime and recess. In mid-March, a massive snowmelt began. The houses dripped icicles, the streets puddled with slush, and rapids gurgled at the sewer drains in the streets. Then April always brought a big thunderstorm that turned the evening sky purple with menacing clouds. The drama in the sky drew Millwood's inhabitants to their porches to watch the storm blow in. The branches in the treetops shook and danced. From next door, I smelled Mr. Reschke smoking his cigar in his garage. Lightning cracked, whip-like, illuminating enormous moving clouds in translucent mauves, snapping one of the big oak trees in the big woods like a twig. The rushing rouge ripped at fallen branches, tearing them into its current. "It's just God bowling," Mom assured Patrick, who covered his ears at the oceanic roar of thunder. "Can I go back inside?" he begged, tugging on her shirt. "My video game is on pause." It stormed all night. In our second-floor bedroom, Patrick and I listened to the incessant patter of raindrops pelting the rooftop. We had wooden bunk beds that crossed perpendicularly, with a built-in desk adjoined to the bottom bunk on one side, and dresser drawers and a bookshelf on the other side. Pat had the top bunk. In my seniority, I had chosen the bottom because of its built-in amenities. Underneath the drone of that desk lamp, I read, I drew, and I listened to late-night sports broadcasts and sports talk radio on 97.1 The Ticket. Using the official 1994-95 NHL encyclopedia, which Dad had finally bought me from the bookstore at the mall, as a reference, I sketched copies of the NHL team logos on computer paper in bed, in addition to drawings of players featured in the book. In sports, more than anything, perhaps, I found a permanent outlet for my insomnia. The next morning, the air outside felt warm and moist from all the standing water. Wearing big rubber boots, some of the Millwood boys met in the streets to jump from puddle to puddle in the streets. We picked worms and dared Steve to eat one. The Rouge had flooded, spawning new creeks through the woods, and the mud made the trails therein impassable for several days. All the water in the area emanated that distinctly odorous but not altogether unpleasant smell of mucky sediment buildup, rotting lily pads, musty soil, and chemical waste. From that one flood alone, it seemed, the woods regenerated almost overnight. Gradually receding flood levels revealed rich beds of fertile brown soil, from which sprouted bright green fern leaves, white and purple wildflowers, loamy mosses, sapling pines, fresh leaves of grass, and dandelions. The treetops displayed bunches of chartreuse green bulbs by the thousands, and the birds came to life en masse, feasting on swollen worms, salamanders, slugs, centipedes, and mosquitoes awakened by the moist earth. On a more personal level, spring annually brought the Millwood boys back together, as if we all heard the call of the wild and were pulled by some gravitational force to the fort and to the woods. Without sentimentality, we commenced working on the fort right where we had left off the previous summer. There was always plenty of work to be done on the fort in May, from winter damage maintenance to new projects and additions conceived of during the long winter months in school. Moreover, spring signaled the annual start of the NHL playoffs, and in my childhood, that invariably meant a Red Wings postseason run. At season's end on May 3rd, 1995, the red-hot Red Wings won the President's Trophy with a league-leading 70 points, their first since the trophy's inception in 1985-86. For the second consecutive year, Ray Shepard led the team in goals, with 30, while veteran defenseman Paul Coffey won the Norris Trophy with a team-leading 44 assists and 58 points on the season. Sergei Fedorov followed up an MVP season admirably, quietly notching 50 points himself, with 20 goals and 30 assists in only 42 games played. Dino Ciccarelli and Keith Primo both notched at least 15 goals and 27 assists, and Mike Vernon manned the pipes solidly in his first year with Detroit, winning 19 games while posting a 2.52 goals against average. Demoted to backup goaltender duties, even Chris Osgood excelled in his sophomore campaign, going 14-5 in 19 starts with a solid 2.26 goals against average that was good enough for third in the NHL on the season. Dad and I discussed all of these stats in the car, listening to sports radio, watching games, reading the sports pages on the weekend, and it gradually became the vehicle by which our relationship developed. Detroit entered those 1995 Stanley Cup playoffs the #1 overall seed, theoretically favorites. They finished a full 9 points better than the second-place team in the Western Conference, the St. Louis Blues, and barring another collapse, they were projected to reach the Stanley Cup final. Philadelphia, Quebec, and Pittsburgh all seemed viable contenders to meet them there from the East. Quebec, the soon-to-be Colorado Avalanche, finished second in the league to Detroit with 65 points, earning the top seed in the Eastern Conference, while Pittsburgh's Jaromir Jagr and Philadelphia's Eric Lindros led the league in points with 70 each. In between T-ball games, which Dad coached, I watched the majority of the 95 playoffs with him in the living room or in the basement. In the first round, the quarterfinals, the Wings met the Dallas Stars. Only 2 years removed from Minnesota, the Stars were powered by Livonia Westland native Mike Modano, already a 50-goal scorer at age 25. After a tightly contested Game 1, which the Wings took 4-3 on a Slava Kozlov game winner, Detroit coasted to a 4-1 Game 2 victory, getting 2 goals from Nick Lidstrom and 1 each from Coffey and Primo. On the road in Dallas, Dino Ciccarelli led a 5-1 rout of the Stars in Game 3, notching his 24th career hat trick in the win. Dallas stole Game 4 at Reunion Arena to avoid the broomsticks, but the Wings bounced back to win Game 5 at the Joe behind goals from Darren McCarty, Ciccarelli, and Kozlov, outscoring Dallas 17-10 in 5 games. Meanwhile, in a first-round series reminiscent of their 1994 upset of Detroit, the 7th-seeded San Jose Sharks took the Pacific Division champion Calgary Flames to a 7th game. In that Game 7, Ray Whitney scored in double overtime for the upset-minded Sharks, silencing the Calgary Saddledome and setting up a rematch with Detroit in the Western Conference semifinals. That second-round series with San Jose gave me my first intoxicating taste of revenge. It was never close. In a 6-0 whitewashing in Game 1, Dino Ciccarelli, Paul Coffey, Doug Brown, Ray Shepard, Sergei Fedorov, and Chris Draper all notched a goal apiece. Fedorov tallied 2 more in Game 2 at Joe Louis, with 1 each for Ciccarelli, McCarty, and Brown in a 6-2 drubbing. Game 3 and 4 were 2 more consecutive 6-2 blowouts at the Shark Tank. Mike Vernon had to do very little in the series, facing only 61 shots to Detroit's 147 against the Sharks goalies in 4 games. With the authoritative sweep, the Red Wings ostensibly brushed their 1994 demons under the rug. It seemed a statement that this Red Wings team was different, and that only made what followed more difficult to bear. In the Western Conference Finals, which didn't start until June due to the lockout, Detroit drew Original Six rival Chicago, the 4 seed from the West. Bolstered by the stonewall goaltending of Ed Belfour, one of the best goalies of his era, the Blackhawks kept the series competitive, with 3 games on the series going to overtime. Those included Game 1, which ended on a Keith Primo goal just 1 minute and 1 second into the first overtime period, a pivotal Game 3 at the United Center, with Detroit up 2-0 in the series, ending on a Vladimir Konstantinov goal 9 minutes 25 seconds into the second overtime, and Game 5 back at the Joe. After Chicago stole Game 4, I watched that Game 5 with Dad, Mr. Racine, and Mr. Rivard, among others, at the Racine's Dearborn house on the first official weekend of the 1995 summer. It was a late night for both the children and adults present, one that didn't end until almost all the beer and soda had disappeared from the big coolers on the back patio. Slava Kozlov scored 2 minutes 25 seconds into the second overtime frame to give Detroit their first Stanley Cup berth since 1966, their first since my dad himself was only 7 years old, prompting drunken jubilation among the adults. "We're going to win the Stanley Cup," I pronounced giddily to Dad one day that week. The ESPN analysts and the writers in the Detroit Free Press, Mitch Albom included, agreed with my prediction. The Wings were the heavy favorites against the 5th-seeded New Jersey Devils. But in the days leading up to the finals, Dad refused to celebrate in early prognostications. "It's not over till the fat lady sings," he warned me. "New Jersey plays a mean trap defense that might give us trouble." The Stanley Cup Finals nonetheless started with great anticipation in Detroit, where crazed fans partied wildly in advance of Game 1, a summer break Saturday in Detroit that saw thermometers reach 88 degrees. The Rivards, Racines, and Tantillos came over to our house, while thousands more descended upon Joe Louis and its surrounding bars for the game. Cold brewskis flowed liberally. Few gave the Devils a chance. Detroit was 8-0 in the playoffs at home, and New Jersey an inferior opponent. My resentment over what I perceived to be my father's overly rigid pragmatism, not only in hockey but in life too, started to materialize as his analysis played out in the first period of Game 1. New Jersey's neutral zone trap, perhaps the most boring style of hockey ever conceived of, indeed confused the Red Wings' offense out of the gates, and the first period finished scoreless. Detroit held to a pedestrian 7 shots. Stefan Richter scored halfway through the second to give the Devils the first lead, and although Dino Ciccarelli answered 4 minutes later, concern grew with the game tied 1-1 after 2 periods. The high-flying Red Wings held to a mere 12 shots. Only 3 minutes and 17 seconds into the third period, Claude Lemieux boorishly introduced himself to Detroit fans with what proved to be the game-winning goal, assisted by John McClain and Tom Chorsky. Concerningly, the Red Wings failed to mount much of a late push, with the Devils outshooting the home team 9-5 in the third period. The party at our house ended morosely. Optimism that New Jersey's Game 1 victory was a fluke proved in vain. On Tuesday, June 20th, I watched Game 2 at home with my dad after a T-ball game. New Jersey yet again held Detroit scoreless through one period, allowing only 7 shots. Detroit took leads early in both the second and third periods on goals by Cicerelli and Fedorov, respectively, but New Jersey had consecutive answers. In the third, the Devils tied the game at 9 minutes 37 seconds on a Scott Niedermayer slap shot, then took the lead with just 1 minute 24 seconds left in the third on a Jim Dowd goal. Stefan Richter added an empty netter shortly thereafter, and it was suddenly, desolately, 2-0 Devils, with the Stanley Cup Finals heading back to New Jersey. The 0-2 deficit felt all the more insurmountable, with Martin Brodeur between the pipes for New Jersey. In the playoffs, he sported a sparkling 1.67 goals against average and a .927 save percentage. By the time of Game 3, most of the collective excitement in Detroit had hardened into stark cynicism and realization that this Red Wings team was no different after all. They had merely gone from early upset choke artists to Stanley Cup Finals choke artists. In my gnawing resentment over my father's words, I turned cynical too. I barely cared to watch with him in Games 3 and 4. There were few parties or get-togethers to watch the inevitable. Even the bars throughout Metro Detroit, probably, remained tame and quiet with despondence. New Jersey beat the Wings 6-2 Thursday, June 22nd, and 5-2 Saturday, June 25th, in consecutive blowouts to sweep the Red Wings. In a widely distributed image, one clever New Jersey fan held a sign against the glass that read, "Welcome to Hell," and that about summarized it. The whole series had lasted only a week. Adding insult to injury, Gary Bettman presented the Conn Smythe Trophy to the repulsive Claude Lemieux in recognition as the Stanley Cup Finals MVP. In a twist of fate, his outstanding performance in the finals allowed Lemieux to hold out for a larger contract from New Jersey following the Stanley Cup celebration there. Refusing to pay him, New Jersey traded the winger to the Colorado Avalanche that summer, just in time for their first game in Denver. The Red Wings would cross paths with him again there.